It's been almost 8 months since Arlecchino was first released in Genshin Impact, and at the time, she seemed to be the second best PYRO DPS. Has the release of Natlan or Mavuika made her feel weak? Of course not. Arlecchino is being rerun right now, and she's still really f***ing good. All that is great, but how does she play? Arlecchino's main win con revolves around her normal attacks that deal enormous pyro damage with the amount of bond of life she has, and will start strong, gradually getting weaker. But let's go over the skill and burst first before going into that any further. Her skill will make her lunge forward, auto-targeting any nearby enemies, and applies a mark called Blood Debt Directives, that, when Arlecchino uses a charged attack, will be cleared off the enemy and give her a bond of life. There's more to this effect in her A1 passive. While you can use her charged attack to get an immediate bond of life, should you wait 5 seconds, those Blood Debt Directives get upgraded into Blood Debt Dues that will double the value of her bond of life. This is important since, depending on how much bond of life Arlecchino has, she will do more damage. Hence why you'll see most rotations having her press skill first, swapping into supports, then back to her to clear the mark and doing her combos. Arlecchino's burst is a nuke ability, but typically not doing more than 2 or 3 normal attacks. Before C6, it's mostly a panic heal button, and I'll get back to that in a second. Her A4 passive is a free elemental and physical res buff for how much attack she has past 1000, up to 20%. Considering that she's mostly paired with Bennett anyways, it's not hard to max out. Now about that panic healing I was talking about. Arlecchino has another passive that gives her 40% more pyro damage bonus in combat, but she can only heal herself through her own burst. This sounds like a bigger problem than it is, but her burst is good enough healing and you'll usually be back up to full or 75% bare minimum when you do use her burst. So her gameplay is mainly focused around applying a Blood Debt Due from her skill, using a charged attack to clear it so she goes into her Mask of the Red Death state, and spamming normal attacks. While you're spamming those normal attacks, her initially 30-second long skill cooldown will go down with every hit. For leveling priority, go into the normal attack first since that's the majority of her damage, then skill, and her burst is last. It doesn't do that much of her damage, and the healing you get from it isn't affected by levels either. What's her best build? Let's start with Arlecchino's best sets. Her best artifact set is the 4-piece Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy, 18% attack on the 2-set effect, and a crazy synergistic 4-piece effect. Whenever the holder's bond of life changes, they do 18% more damage for 6 seconds, stacking up to 54% more damage. Arlecchino does bond of life stuff, so it's a perfect fit. The close runner-up set is the 4-piece Gladiator's Finale. Again, 18% attack on the 2-piece effect, but with an unconditional 35% normal attack damage bonus if the holder is a melee weapon type. You might have a pretty decent set of this lying around from doing Ascension bosses, or if you have garbage artifacts, you can strongbox a set. For main stats, attack percent, pyro damage, crit. If you're purely going with Vape, EM Sands is also an option. Taking a look at weapons, Arlecchino's best is of course her signature Crimson Moon Semblance. It gives high base attacks, some crit rate, and an effect that will give a bond of life after the wielder uses a charged attack, which she already wants to do, and will buff their damage by how much bond of life they have. That's her best weapon, but I mean, it's an event-exclusive 5-star weapon, so not the most common for players to have. What is more common is the Primordial Jade Winged Spear. It gives the same stats, but with an attack stacking passive every time she hits an enemy. It's not as big of a buff as with Crimson Moon Semblance, but makes for her second best weapon. For some more weapon recommendations, there's the Staff of Scarlet Sands, Staff of Homa, Lumidus Elegy if you have it but not Emily for some reason, Deathmatch, and Ballad of the Fjords. All other 5-star options will sit in between all of those. If you have none of those, White Tassel is great as an FTP weapon that you can grab from chests in Liyue. Going over Constellations real quick, they're all pretty good. Extremely unnecessary, but pretty good. C1 doubles the damage bonus Arlecchino gets from the Mask of the Red Death state, and she gets interruption resistance. C2 turns every Blood Debt Directive into a Due immediately without having to wait 5 seconds. On top of that, when you clear it off an enemy, it does 900% of her attack as pyro damage. Pretty busted burst damage. C3 gives 3 talent levels to her normal attack. That being her main source of damage makes this pretty good. C4 reduces her burst cooldown by 2 seconds and gives her 15 energy when you clear a Blood Debt Directive. Not the biggest upgrade, but sure. C5 gives 3 talent levels to her burst. C6 will buff her base burst damage by her attack multiplied by 700% of her current bond of life. Paired with C2, this is an insane effect. And within 20 seconds of using her skill, her normal attacks and burst will get a buff of 10% crit rate and 70% crit damage. Huge constellation befitting of a C6. Do you need it? Not at all. If you want some of them anyways, I'd recommend C2 or C3 to be nice stopping points. So, good teams. Pyro can vaporize and melt. Naturally, her best teams will follow. Her overall best team will include a Hydro support, either Kazuha or Shilonen, and Bennett. Your best Hydro choices are either Xingqiu or Yelan. Shocker. You'd think it'd be Farina, but since Arlecchino already can't be healed, Farina making her passively lose HP isn't all that great in the long run. Xingqiu can be more of a defensive option, with his orbital swords making Arlecchino take less damage. Or you can use Yelan and send your damage output to the moon. The Bale Moon, that is. I'm so dumb. Yelan also gives the option of using Elegy for the end to buff team-wide attack percent and EM if you have it. Kazuha or Shilonen is also pretty self-explanatory. They both buff elemental damage bonus and lower enemy elemental resistance, assuming you're running Viridescent on Kazuha and Scroll on Shilonen. Bennett is Bennett. Not much more to say there. You can also choose to run a double Hydro and Zhongli comp similar to an older Hu Tao team structure that can be just as good. Arlecchino can also be run in a melt team, but the timings can get pretty tight. Fast cryo applicators are pretty few and far between, so you really only have a couple of options for team comps. One is Rosario or Kaya, Kazuha, and Bennett. This team mainly relies on either Kazuha or Kaya to set up the cryo and for Kazuha to swirl it so you can get the most out of it with Arlecchino. Not the best feeling team to use, but you can use it. The other replaces the Rosaria Kaya slot with Citlali, and Kazuha could also be interchanged with Shilonen. Citlali's A1 passive reduces Pyro and Hydro res of enemies hit by the melt or freeze reactions. Her cryo app is a little bit slower, but if you can work around it, Arlecchino can hit some really big melts. Another team comp you can use is one with Chevra's Overloaded. Not the greatest of reactions, but if any of the teams I brought up earlier use characters you'd want to use on other teams, this one is still good. You can use any assortment of Pyro or Electro characters so long as there is one of each, obviously including Arlecchino and Chevra's. You can go triple Pyro, 1 Electro, or double Pyro, double Electro. Doesn't really matter as long as you can keep Chevra's A1 passive active. Best team here is Arlecchino, Fischl, Chevra's, and Bennett. The last relevant team archetype I'll bring up is Mono Pyro, or you can call it Pyromaxing. I am not sorry. Arlecchino does a lot of damage. Why not make that damage even more red? It comes to be the most open team archetype that is just mostly damage spam. Use buffers, burning, off-field damage. It's kinda just up to you. Looking at Arlecchino's competition, there's mainly Hu Tao and Mavuika when we're talking about on-field Pyro DPS. Hu Tao has both the advantage and disadvantage of being the game for longer. I say advantage in that it's not too unfair to expect that I'll be judging based on Hu Tao at least having C1, because in terms of C0, Arlecchino completely stomps her. Arlecchino has an easier normal attack playstyle and nets more damage than Hu Tao's charge attack playstyle. And if I had to rate them at C0, Hu Tao loses immediately because of how much her stamina is being used to dodge and attack at the same time, which makes her lose damage. The disadvantage being she needs C1 to not feel like garbage. Honorable mention to Linny, since he also fits in Hu Tao's damage range, but pretty sure Hu Tao's the more popular character, so that's why he's an honorable mention. A more apt comparison is to Mavuika. Mavuika just recently came out and does half a mil or a straight mil of burst damage, coupled with her Flame Strider charged attacks that can also react. Does this mean Arlecchino got on? No, not even close. Just because this new character's damage is ludicrous doesn't mean Arlecchino's got any less crazy. Being able to do 500k with a bunch of caveats doesn't make the easy 100k's bad. I think some people got the wrong message about Mavuika. Yeah, sure, she can hit upwards of 1 million on her burst, but that requires a specific team tailor-made for that to happen. Not everyone has or wants those characters. Mavuika's burst can do a bunch of damage, but it relies on fighting spirit, and while it can be generated with normal attacks, it goes up way higher if you're burning Night Soul points, which only Natlanese characters can do! If you don't have the characters to do that, Mavuika's damage can fall off a cliff real hard. That's not even going over how she gets her vapes and melts. Mavuika's best abilities for doing damage are her burst and Flame Strider charged attacks. Normal attacks can be used, but they're not great, and that throws some Hydra applicators out of the running. You know, only a couple of the best in the game. In terms of melt, there's not that many great options outside of Citlali. That wouldn't be a problem unless Mavuika drained you of all your Primogems and you couldn't get Citlali. For the other two slots, I mean, Bennett is Bennett, but then Shilonen is kind of a must, especially if you don't have Citlali. Mavuika needs a lot of fighting spirit to even cast her burst in the first place, never minding it doing decent damage. You pretty much have to have either Citlali or Shilonen. Best case is if you have both. Whereas with Arlecchino, she does normal attacks, so Xingqiu or Yelan are on the table. She only needs a small, but very flexible setup to get going. She has the caveat of not being able to receive healing from other characters, but that's easier to work around than needing to load your main damage source with Natlan characters. So yes, Mavuika can do more damage than Arlecchino, but the cost to get there is a lot, and some players just might not want the necessary support characters to make it happen. Overall, Arlecchino and Mavuika do about the same, considering build and team costs, along with how easy it is to get them up and running. Bottom line, Arlecchino is still great with Mavuika's release. You know, instead of thinking that every new character needs to be better than an old one, we could just have multiple that do about the same thing, but in different ways. Characters like Arlecchino or Mavuika is similar to how Mualani was being compared to Neuvillette. They do about the same thing overall, it just depends on who you'd rather use. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next upload. See ya.